Hey everybody, welcome back to When Harry Met Board Games, where we feed our people with relatable content and our victory condition is your satisfaction. I'm Harry, and before we go any further, please don't forget to hit the subscribe button somewhere on the lower right hand side of your screen. That way we could all move on with our lives and enjoy the rest of this video. Today we have another top 10 list. Today I'll be doing my top 10 Z-Man games. So these are games that have been published by Z-Man Games, the publishing company, and this is a company that has a very long, extensive catalog of games. Some that they still have the rights to, some that they do not. I have not played as many games of Z-Man Games in proportion to how much this company has put games out there. One caveat is that the games that I will be including in this list are games that my editions of them are published by Z-Man Games. There are some games that I have that are currently from the Z-Man line, but my edition of them may not be from the Z-Man publishing, originally at least, so that's why it's not included in this list. And there are other games here that may no longer be under the Z-Man brand, but my copy of them are. So without any further ado, let's get straight into our top 10. My number 10 Z-Man Games game is Through the Desert, which is a reprint of Reiner Knizia's classic abstract game, not so abstract, about making chains and connections of camels going through the deserts and connecting with oases and water spots as sources of water, good old H2O. And this reprint includes a double-sided board so that players, if they get bored with one side of the board, or they get tired with one side of the board, they could experiment with a different side of the board that has a slightly different configuration. One side here has a river on top of everything, and the other side does not. So this is a cool double-sided board. The pieces are nice looking, colorful, candy-like camels that you place on the board and you make connections. This game is very similar to the classic abstract strategy game of Go, in the sense that you're trying to build networks of your pieces connecting to one another. You're circling and enclosing other players' pieces, which kind of defeats them, eliminates them, and also creates some empty space in the board for you to score from. It's a nice and neat game. It's one of my favorite abstract strategy games. I have to admit that I like abstracts more in theory than I do in practice, but this one works for me because, again, it has a really beautiful presentation, and I tend to appreciate Reiner Knizia's approach to the abstract strategy game. So this is my number 10, Through the Desert. Now we move on to my number 9, which is Babel, and this is another reprint. Not too sure. I don't think the original edition was through Z-Man Games, but this reprint is. Babel is designed by Uwe Rosenberg, and this game is a card game. However, there is a board in the center to designate 5 different areas or regions in which players are placing down their different nation cards, and you have the Sumerians, and you have the Hittites, and you have the Persians, and you have the Assyrians, right? And who else do you have? And then you have the Medes, of course. So there's 5 different groups. They're all color-coded, and you're placing these cards down one by one into different the different 5 zones here. And whenever you have 3 in a row or more of a particular color, each color has a specific player power that activates, and you activate it simply by discarding one of those cards that are 3 in a row or more of the same color. So if you have 4 in a row, then you could probably activate that power twice, 5 in a row 3 times, and so on and so forth. Really cool, because all these powers, really what they let you do is they make you hurt your opponent. This is a 2-player only game, which is the only reason why I feel like it works. Because if this was a multiplayer game, this would be too mean of a game. I would not have the heart to pick on one person so much if I had a plethora or a multitude of opponents to pick from, because I would feel like I'm picking on an individual. But in a 2-player game, it works really, really well. You're trying to use these actions in particular to allow you to build temples in each of these zones, and the temples each have 6 levels, and the highest level you could complete is 6, but you must complete them in succession unless special powers allow you to do otherwise. So from your 1, you build to your 2, to your 3, to your 4, to your 5. And the game ends when a certain condition is met. And I believe it's 15 points and your opponent has to have less than 10 or something like that. So that's really, really tough because it's tit for tat. You must be doing really well and your opponent must be doing weak. But the point of this game is the lead exchanges back and forth so many times. It's a very volatile game. It's not static because you can have 15 points and a couple turns later, you can actually have like 11. Like points can be taken away from you based on the actions that opponents are taking. So you have to like calculate and strategize, adequately so you could pull the trigger at the right time and score that threshold when your opponent is still below the losing condition threshold. Really, really neat. Designed by Uwe Rosenberg. He does have a co-designer in this game. It's Hagen Dorgathen. Never seen him again since. I don't think so, at least. But again, this is a great, fun, classic game. My number 9 game from Z-Man Games, Babel. Now we move on to my number 8. And again, it's another classic reprint, and it's Taj Mahal. So that's one thing that Z-Man has been doing a lot in recent years. They've been taking popular titles that were once published with other companies, like Rio Grande and some other companies, and they're taking it their own, putting a brand new edition, a new spin to it, maybe a few variants included in the rule book, but nice presentation and beautiful production. I really love the production in this game, from the nice pieces here for the palaces that you are placing down on the map right here. Nice little Taj Mahal palaces in nice, unique player colors, not your typical standard colors. To the nice little tiles with their art as well. The tiles representing the different markets and the different resources that players could potentially collect. Really, really cool. The cards are nice. Nice cards with a little artwork there. And of course the board, which represents the map of India. And the 12 different regions that players will be going through in successive order. They're going to be randomized, and they're each going to be assigned a different number from 1 through 12. And you're going to go through them again in successive order. And each region, you're going to be doing the same thing. You're going to be bidding in an auction of sorts, using different different character symbols to win the favor of some of these court officer characters. And basically, by winning their favor, it grants you access to place palaces in those regions that you're vying for. It allows you to get access to the market and the resources that they win you and the points that they produce for you. Really, really cool, because you have some nice set collection that builds on itself, similar to games like Castles of Burgundy with the animals and how they continue to score for you throughout the game. It has some nice auction bidding. Like I mentioned, it even has a little bit of route network building when you're connecting palaces and trying to connect into other regions on the map in order to score additional points. Fun game, beautiful. I've had a great time. Those who've watched the channel know that this is not the first top 10 list in which I included my number 8 game from Z-Man Games, Taj Mahal. Now we move on to my number 7. And this is a game by Uwe Rosenberg again, Le Havre L'Import. So far, the first 4 games I've covered have been Rainer Knizia, Uwe Rosenberg, Rainer Knizia, Uwe Rosenberg. Maybe I like these designers, who knows? But this right here is a 2-player version of the bigger, classic game Le Havre, where players are each running a port and or they're working through the port and they're trying to produce and ship goods to make lots of money. But this game simplifies things and breaks it down into a 30-minute experience for 2 players. And the main mechanisms in this game are twofold. First of all, each player has one of these dials. And what these dials do is when you buy a building in this game, the buildings are not represented by cards. Instead, they're represented by these house-shaped tiles, right? That tell you how much they cost and tell you what action they produce. So when you buy one of these buildings, when you acquire them, you place them on your 0 spot in your dial. And each round, you turn your dial counterclockwise, signifying not only that we're in the following round, but also indicating how many actions the players will have collectively, because just like in regular Le Havre, there's a collective amount of actions, and it's an odd number amount of actions, so one player in each turn is going to have one more action than the other player. But unlike Le Havre, where you always have 7 actions each round, this game revs up. You start off with just 3 collective actions in round 1, and by round 12 the players have a combined 9 actions, so it becomes really, really powerful. But as I was mentioning, when you rotate this dial clockwise, the number in which or the sector in which your buildings are located has a different number that's going to be lined up with it. And that number indicates how many times you can trigger that action that round if you so choose to use that building that round. So you could trigger the action 2 times or 3 times or 4 times or 4 times and collect 1 coin. However, if you wait too long to use your building, what happens is you get this terrible sign here that means you have to get rid of that building and sell it for only half of its value. So it depreciates and you also have lost access to that building. Now what's really cool is your opponents can use your buildings by paying you 1 coin. So that element is very similar to regular Le Havre. The other key mechanism in this game is this warehouse, this grid in which you're going to use tiles for the 4 main goods in this game, which are fish, bread or grain, and clay and wood. Those are the 4 major resources. And you're going to be using this grid to indicate how much you have of each resource. And the columns here have a number, and the rows here have a number, and whatever spot your particular resource tile is on, you're going to see where it intersects, and you're going to add the number on the column and the number on the row, and based on that, you will see how much you have of that resource. The interesting thing is that when you spend resources, ideally, you want to move your resource tile leftward to show that you've spent 1. However, when you get to the leftmost space, you cannot just start all the way back over here. You have to go downward, which means whenever you need to use just 1 resource of a kind, you're actually going to spend 3 and you're going to overpay, which is one of the frustrating experiences in this game. You really want to manipulate it correctly. Also, all the buildings really do in this game are they help you manipulate this this grid here by telling you that you can move upward, that you can move diagonally upward in one direction or another, or that you can move rightward and increase your goods in different ways. Really, really cool, really, really neat, pretty abstracted, and definitely mechanically speaking, very far off from what Le Havre was, but I like this as an alternative of a similar themed game. That is my number 7 Z-Man game of all time, Le Havre in import. And now we move on to my number 6. And wow, this was so hard because I love this game. And when I went into making this list, I didn't think that this game would rank so low, but I realized I loved so many of the Z-Man games that I had to put this game at number 6, and that is El Grande, the classic 1995 Spiel des Jahres award winner, designed by Wolfgang Kramer and Richard Ulrich. This game is the grandfather of all area control, area majority games. And basically, from a graphic design perspective, it's not the greatest. These newer editions, again, Z-Man, I don't think produced the original edition, but they do produce this edition. And what they've added is meeples instead of cubes, which does help a little bit with the presentation. The board, again, is not the most amazing thing. It's just basically a map of Spain, of Iberia here. On one side, you have Spain right here, and the expansion, which is included in this game, the double-sided board, has Portugal as well as a region. Here you actually have America. There's actually a module that makes you add Portugal. Here you have America as an option for your area majority. This game comes with 5 expansions. This is the big box edition. Comes with 5 expansions. I've only played with one of the expansions, but I think it's pretty neat. One of my favorite games. I swear I would love this game so much more. It's so neat, it's so streamlined, it's so elegant, and at the same time, his combination of the different mechanisms, because you even have an auction for turn order, and I feel like it was the first game to really do that. Lots of games nowadays have auctions for turn order, but I feel like this is one of the first games to really do that. And again, the one thing that keeps this game from ranking higher on my list is the fact that the people that I game with do not like this game nearly as much as I do, and that is so heartbreaking. I have a couple of people I game with that like this game okay, and I have a couple other people that don't want to have anything to do with this game, and that is so frustrating because I adore this game, and it's possible that it would be ranked higher if it were not for that. But even as it is, even as it stands, this is my number 6 Z-Man game of all time, El Grande. Now we're going to move on to the top 5, the cream of the crop. And, you know, I feel like numbers 5 through 2, number 1 is pretty solid, but numbers 5 through 2 might fluctuate and change here and there throughout the months and years. But right now, this is where they stand. My number 5 is none other than the classic Carcassonne, which again, going back to a theme I think all of these games have, is that it was not originally published by Z-Man Games, but for the last several years, Z-Man has had the rights to this game. I would have actually ranked this higher if I wasn't so strict about it, because what I did was, some of my favorite iterations of Carcassonne are out of print iterations that are no longer published and were originally published by Rio Grande. So I actually chose to not factor those in, and I just thought about Carcassonne, the base game, and some of the newer spin-offs that are still under the Z-Man brand. And based on that, this made it to number 5. Classic game, one of the first, you know, designer games that I played, gateway game, but at the same time, you add some of the expansions, and it feels meaty enough to be, you know, a nice medium weight family style game that a gamer can play. And I love playing this game. As a matter of fact, you know, the first 2 expansions, Inns and Cathedrals and Traders and Builders, I don't always play with their tiles, but I always play with their meeples. No matter what, I always play with their meeples. I always play with the Abbott meeple. That's something that these are just a couple meeple pieces that, regardless of what mood I'm in, they're going to be in the game. But this is such a fun game. You know, so much expansions just to this base game. I think this game is best at 2 players. I don't even have to talk about this game. If you're watching this video, chances are you know what Carcassonne is. You're placing down pieces. You're kind of like continuing the landscape. It's almost like a puzzle. But when you place a piece, you have a simple choice after you've placed it. Do you want to put a meeple, a little wooden piece that represents a character that gives you some special scoring ability? Or do you not? Do you pass? And those are it. 2 simple choices as you play the game. However, it could get very deep the more you play this game and the more you become familiar with all the tiles that are possibly out there. And that's why it's my number 5 game from Z-Man Games, Carcassonne. Now we move on to my number 4, and that is many people's number 1, and it's Pandemic, the mega hit popular cooperative game. And this game, I believe, was originally published by Z-Man, so that's cool. But this is this was not what the original edition looks like, but it's been the edition that's been out there for many, many years. Love this game, love its expansions. I love playing with On the Brink. I love playing with In the Lab. I have not played with State of Emergency yet, but I look forward to playing that as well. This game is such a great gateway game. I play it with so much people. It's such a great team building exercise type of game. The group thing, the puzzly nature. I know a lot of people have gotten played out on this, but I've played this game dozens upon dozens of times. You should actually check out my most played games. Spoiler alert, this is somewhere in that top 10, because I don't find it to get old, especially with the expansions. Maybe perhaps if you didn't have the expansions, you know, a couple dozen plays and that would be it. But with the expansions, I find that it adds nearly infinite replayability to the game, because you got so many different characters, so many events that you can mix and match, so many different modules that help you. You could play team versus team with one of the modules in the lab. You could play, you know, one versus all with one of the modules is On the Brink. You could play solo mode, which I've really enjoyed playing, again, with one of the modules in the expansion. And then again, there's just so many different modules that add different challenges that you could actually combine with one another to make for some really, really insurmountable, you know, type of games as far as trying to win the game. Hot, wonderful, classic game. My number 4 game from Z-Man Games, Pandemic. And now my number 3, and this is very interesting, is Pandemic the Cure. And I really had to wrestle with this. I think in the long run, Pandemic is going to win out. I just have that hunch. But for now, I am really, really enjoying Pandemic the Cure. I like the differences. And while it's luck based in many degrees, because after all, you're rolling dice. This is a dice version of Pandemic for those who don't know. It has beautiful customized dice, by the way, which I really think is cool. You have all the nice individualized dice for the different characters, right? Because each player has a role within the team, the CDC team that's trying to cure the world of the dice, of the diseases. And what's interesting is that in general, players have the same kind of actions available to them, but your individual player dice differs from the other roles player dice, which means you might be able to do one action that they cannot do at all, or even some of the generic actions, you might have more probability of having some of them. So one character might be able to treat disease more often than the other. Another character might be able to travel around the globe more effectively. So there's all these different things that you could do to be a great part of the team. Now, however, I do have to say, I find this game personally to be harder than regular Pandemic because I have never won this game, and you'd be surprised. I've actually played it a decent amount of times, and I find that at 2 players, I haven't played this with 3 players yet, so that's one thing. I find that at 2 players, it's just too hard. In Pandemic, it's actually easier with 2 players. I find that in Pandemic the Cure, you just can't cover enough of the world. And it's interesting because the world is only, you know, it's represented in a very abstract way. You've got these discs that represent like 6 different continents across the world, but even though there's only 6 locations that you could travel through, you're limited into how much you can move, you know, which keeps it balanced, right? There's only 6 places. You shouldn't be able to just go wherever you want. But it's just so hard. I find, maybe I haven't cracked the code yet, but I still think that it's so fun. I think it's so neat. I love how you trigger the different events. I love, you know, how the outbreaks occur and how you have to gauge for, you know, the epidemics and all that good stuff. Really, really fun game. Again, for now, it's currently my number 3 game from Z-Man Games, Pandemic the Cure. Now we move on to my number 2. And right now, it's currently occupying the spot. And I think it has a good chance of staying there because I really dig this game. And that is Kingsburg. And Kingsburg here, designed by Andrea Chiarvesio and Luca Iannacco. I hope I'm saying their names right. This is a classic game itself. It's not a new game. This game is like 13 years old. And this is a worker placement game. But in this game, what's interesting is that dice are your workers. But it's so cool because there's so many different ways of being able to mitigate the dice, including special tokens that players get that allow players to add 2 to their dice roll. Certain buildings that you edify that allow you to add or subtract 1 from your die roll. This game has so many things that I like. I love the worker placement. I love the dice with dice mitigation, right? With being able to mitigate the dice. I love city building. You're building your city or your portion of Kingsburg by erecting these different buildings, and the different buildings give you different points, victory points for the game, and they give you different special abilities. But I even like the idea, thematically speaking, behind the worker placement, where the spots are not just like locations that produce you things. They're actually different people within the royal society, different members of the king's court, going all the way from the king and queen and working their way all the way down to the jester here. And based on where you go, you can score you can gather certain resources, or you can strengthen your army, because at the end of each round, you have the winter season, and the winter season concludes with some enemy, you know, fighting to destroy your part of Kingsburg, and you're just trying to, you know, fend them off and not take any casualties, and hopefully actually, you know, get some spoils from the battle and actually improve your economic situation. So many different things to manipulate here. So many awesome spots and choices that even if players block your spot, there's still going to be so many great other alternatives that you could do. And again, just comboing the different buildings that you erect and build in your portion of the city and the order in which you build them, because you must build, they must have, you know, they have to be the leftmost building that has not been built. You cannot jump to a certain part in the grid because you're part of the city here. This city board here with the buildings is like a grid. So for me to be able to build this building must first be built. That's a prerequisite, plus providing the resources that building would need. Really, really cool. This game here, this is actually a reprint, even though the original edition was also, I believe, a Z-Man game. This is a reprint, and this reprint includes the expansion to Forge a Realm, which has a lot of amazing modules in them. I've peeked at them. I haven't played with them. I've only played the base game, and for now, that's good enough for me. But it's amazing to know that there's so much content in this game that you can mix and match and combine. Awesome game. My number 2 game from Z-Man Games, Kingsburg. And that's it. We're going to get to my number 1 game. And this is a game that's out of print. And I don't know who has the rights to it. But I was able to, several months ago, to buy this game as a grail game of mine. A game that I really, really wanted. My number 1 game from Z-Man Games is Ora Labora. Again, back to Uwe Rosenberg. This is an amazing game. This game combines so many wonderful, awesome ideas of Uwe. You've got the worker placement from Agricola with a good amount of workers, not just a singular worker. You have these dials here, which Uwe Rosenberg has implemented dials like this in many of his games. You have the resource conversion with these double-sided tiles here that serve for victory points. Serve for victory points for food, and have a second side, which is like an upgraded side quite often. And you're using your different buildings, again, kind of like Le Havre. You're building buildings, and you're using your buildings, they're your worker placement spots, that allow you to work and manipulate these different goods and resources and convert them into upgraded versions of themselves. However, there's a spatial element to this game that doesn't really exist in some of his other games, in the sense that the different buildings that you're building, not only do they score you a certain amount of points, right, objectively, no matter what, but some of these buildings, for example, the cloister buildings, must be built somewhere along your player board that is adjacent to other cloister buildings, right? They cannot be separated or severed from the rest of the cloister buildings. Also, what's really cool is that some of your buildings score you points based on the other buildings that surround them. So again, you are thinking, you're manipulating your grid, your little player board, which starts like this with a certain amount of spots. Some of them are covered by forests in order for you to, chop them down and produce wood and produce other resources. And you're limited with your space, but you're making your decisions to see where you're going to place your buildings once you've acquired them, because again, where you place them can trigger and produce more points. You also have these different expansions to your land, right? So you have these field expansions that you could put above and below your main player board. You also have coastal expansions that you could place on the right-hand or left-hand side of your board. You have mountain expansions, which you could place on your right side of your board. And all of these different terrains are very important because certain buildings have a prerequisite of these terrain types for you to be able to build them. And not only that, but as the game progresses, you're going to run out of space to place new buildings anyways, so you're going to want to expand upward, downward, right, and left. So really, really cool. Just following this grid, this dial, and knowing where the resources are, how valuable they are during the turn, just deciphering when is the time to expand, the manipulation of the goods. One really cool thing is they have this one worker, which is the prior. Every player has 3 workers. 2 of them are just regular monks. This is a monastic themed game where players are, all monks. But the prior has a special ability, which is whenever you buy a building, you can place the prior on that building on the very same turn that you bought it and trigger its ability. So having the prior available is very optimal. And also, if your opponents have their workers available, you could actually pay them a little bit of money to contract one of their available workers and therefore use one of their buildings. So the only way you could use their buildings is if A, you have the money to spend their building, to pay them for their building, and B, if they have an available worker and that building happens to be unoccupied. Really, really cool. Just so many amazing things. Some new, some refurbished and recycled from other Uwe Rosenberg games. Again, I think that this is an excellent game. Love it. It did not let me down. It is my number 1 game from Z-Man Games, Ora and Labora. And that's it, folks. That is my list. Thank you so much for joining us here at When Harry Met Board Games. What are your favorite Z-Man games? What games have you played? What games are you looking forward to? What do you think about the games on my list? Is Z-Man even a company you've experimented with or explored their games? Maybe not. I want to hear down below in the comments. Please feel free to comment. Also, don't forget again to hit the subscribe button. Like this video, guys. This is Harry saying take care, everybody. Have fun gaming and stay safe. Catch you next time. Bye-bye.